Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I'm the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. MOAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. We welcome you to our virtual celebration of the holiday honoring Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. As we begin, we want to acknowledge the spaces we are occupying. Though we are gathered virtually, we recognize that non-native people to this land are descendants of settler occupiers or those forcefully brought to this continent. MOAD occupies the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, and we pay our respects to the Ohlone people and their elders, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We encourage all to learn more about the native lands that you occupy by visiting nativeland.ca. I'm thrilled to close our celebration today with a discussion of the award-winning documentary Attica. If you haven't seen the film, it is available on YouTube through the end of February, and I will put a link to access it in the chat. We have co-directors Stanley Nelson and Traci A. Curry in conversation today with filmmakers Peter Nix and John Else. Stanley Nelson is today's leading documentarian of the African American experience. His films combine compelling narratives with rich historical detail to illuminate the underexplored American past. A MacArthur Genius Fellow, Nelson has received nearly every award in broadcasting, including 5 Primetime Emmy Awards and Lifetime Achievement Awards from the Emmys, the Peabody Awards, and the International Documentary Association. In 2016, Nelson was honored with the National Medal in the Humanities from President Barack Obama. Traci A. Curry is a national award-winning producer, director, and writer of powerful stories, with more than 2 decades of experience in creating compelling, in-depth narratives for multimedia platforms, including long and short-form documentaries. She is co-director and producer of Attica, selected as the opening night documentary at the 2021 Toronto International Film Festival. Traci is also the founder and owner of her production company, Be Free Media, named to honor her hero, pioneering journalist Ida B. Wells, and her newspaper, the Memphis Free Speech, which was burned in 1892 following Wells' groundbreaking expose of lynching in the South. Peter Nix is an award-winning cinematographer, director known for his immersive camera work and cinema verite style. He helmed the critically acclaimed feature documentary, The Waiting Room, and won the 2017 Sundance Film Festival's U.S. Documentary Directing Award for The Force. His most recent film, Homeroom, completes a trilogy of timely, immersive documentaries exploring the interconnected narratives of healthcare, criminal justice, and education in Oakland, California. John Else is a documentary filmmaker best known for Sing Faster, The Stagehand's Ring Cycle, The Day After Trinity, J. Robert Oppenheimer and the Atomic Bomb, and Cadillac Desert. He was series producer and cinematographer for Henry Hampton's Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights Years. Else produced, directed, and photographed Wonders Are Many, The Making of Dr. Atomic, Yosemite, The Fate of Heaven, Palace of Delights, and Open Outcry. His most recent film, Land of Gold, premiered at the Telluride Film Festival this year. So please join me in welcoming this illustrious panel to discuss the really quite amazing film Attica. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's Elizabeth. Hey, everybody. Hey, John. Hey, Stanley. Hey, Traci.
How are you?
Hey,
I am. I'm really grateful to be able to share this conversation. This day is very special for me. Growing up as a kid, my dad hosted the MLK breakfast every year at the Greater Framingham Community Church in Framingham, Massachusetts. So it's a special day for me. It helps me remember my dad and sort of what he stood for. And that was sort of he was sort of the foundation, of my work and sort of, my voice as a filmmaker. And of course, we spent many summers on Martha's Vineyard, Stanley. And I think the first time I came to be aware of you was your personal film about your family. And after I watched this movie, it just sort of really struck me, the arc of your career. And so I'm looking forward to talking about that, and also sort of Traci, sort of your work, how it's dovetailed. I'm very curious to sort of hear more about how you two came together to realize this vision of this really remarkable. I'm a verite filmmaker, but this film, it like felt like verite to me. It felt immersive. It felt immediate, authentic, real. All those things that I strive to accomplish. And so hats off to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Stanley, why don't you just tell me how, what was the genesis of the project?
Yeah, I think that I had been thinking about making a film about Attica, I don't know, for 20, 30 years. When Attica happened, in 71, I was 19, 20 years old. And, I heard about it and knew about it and saw it unfold like everybody else. But I didn't really know the story. And I felt that there was so many things that I didn't know. Why did the prisoners rebel? Why did they rebel at that time? What was it really like in the rebellion, in the yard? And really importantly, why did Nelson Rockefeller decide to send the troops in with guns blazing into Attica, and the horrible result that happened? So I had been thinking about it for a long time, and I thought that it was a film that really would say a lot about prisons and prison reform and race and power in our country, and it wouldn't center on one person. We've thought a lot about at Firelight about how to make a film about prisons, and so many times when films are made about prisons, you follow one person, and their struggles with the prison system, and you come out, after you see the film, and you think, wow, that person really had it bad. But you don't think about the whole system. And I think that Attica said something about the whole system. And I guess, maybe 3-4 years ago, we started thinking about it seriously, because the people who were in the yard, a lot of people were in their 20s, the prisoners. And it's now, almost 50 years later. So they're still, 70 or, 75. And we thought that this was really the last best time that we could get them and get their stories. And that's when we really kind of went into high gear to try to get this film made.
What struck me immediately about it, I made a film several years ago about the Oakland Police Department that, stepped into some very difficult spaces in terms of perspective. Whose story were we telling, and for what reasons, and how to sort of balance those perspectives, and especially at a time in our country where we have such a difficult time seeing each other, and when our national narrative has been cleaved in half, it seems. How much did the present moment affect and impact how you thought about telling this story?
I think for me, in many ways, it didn't. In many ways, I looked at it as a story that we wanted to tell. Certainly, we knew what was happening in the present moment, and that was coloring and shaping everything. But I'm not sure that if we made the film 5-10 years ago, the content of the film would have been much different. But I know Traci has talked about this a lot and has things to say about this, so I'll let her say something.
Yeah, I mean, I think the making of this film in my mind is really inseparable from the time in which it was made. We made this film in 2020 and everything that goes along with that. And so like Stanley said, in some ways the story is what it is, and we would have told it the way that we told it. But I think making this film in the midst of everything that was going on in the world, it really kind of crystallized for me what the story is all about. In many ways, it's that last day on the 13th is the reason that we're here, that why we're talking about Attica. And it's really a story about what happens when you have a righteous resistance and dissent against the state abuse of power, and the way that the state responds to that, right? And so I was, as we all were, in my little pandemic bubble here in my house making this, and there were George Floyd protests happening outside my window. I saw police attack a protester outside my window. So I think the story of Attica would have been what it is, whatever time we told it, but making it during this time where there was this very vocal and visible outcry against the abuse of state power and state violence through the police really sort of crystallized, I think, for me, what this story of Attica is really, really all about.
I think also, it raised the stakes for us. Obviously, it became more important that we get the story right. I think also in a really interesting way, what the George Floyd protests did, and the other protests, is they kind of open the window a little bit for people to understand and see what happened at Attica in just slightly a different way, and accept what happened at Attica, and not say, oh, these guys are prisoners, and oh, they're lying, because we know now. I think we think about the world in a slightly different way, and that's so many people in this country. So I think it helped with the acceptance of the film, the whole George Floyd protests, and how we think about law enforcement and criminal justice in a slightly different way than we did 3 or 4 years ago.
I come to this with an interesting perspective, because when I was working with Henry Hampton at Blackside, we did this story 20 years ago. And I'm glad, these stories have to be told new every generation or two. They have to be told by new filmmakers. They have to be told in a new context. And we tried to do it in 20 minutes. We did an okay job of it. But I'm really curious to hear from you guys where you've got all this astonishing new material, because I've been making movies about the late 1960s and early 70s for a long time, and I had what you took us down this horrible rabbit hole into Attica that I really did not know what had gone on inside those prison walls. I thought I knew from the work we had done. So where did you get this incredible material, especially from the final 15 minutes of the film?
Traci, you want to answer that?
Yeah, so I'll speak to that last day, because I know Stanley loves to talk about the archival search, which is like, he is a magician at turning that stuff up. As far as those horrible, harrowing images that you see on the 13th, a lot of those photographs, all of those photographs, came from the decades of litigation that followed what happened on the 13th. And there was a team of lawyers that pretty much worked pro bono for 20-25 years on behalf of the prisoners. And one of the lead attorneys who made this really her life's mission is a woman by the name of Liz Fink. And so we were able to get access to all of her archives that one of her assistants had actually digitized for us. And it just had everything. I mean, what you see in the film is really a fraction of what was there. And we, tried to be very deliberate in selecting, the images that we would show. I mean, obviously you have to see the devastation that was left in the wake of those 8 minutes of shooting. But, we had a lot of conversations to sort of figure out where that line is, what is too much, but really needing people to walk away feeling the brutality of what happened that day. So most of those images all came from the evidence that she had gathered.
Mm-hmm. I have to say that the fact that it's evidence is what makes it so powerful. In the Attica story we did long ago, Big Black was still alive. Sam Pollard interviewed him, and Big Black described that moment. He described having the football under his neck and being beaten. And he cries. And to have that now validated with these photographs of the same incident, the same moment, is amazing to me. It's also, I have to say, the resonances between those shots of the naked men and all the images we've brought from the Holocaust are undeniable. I mean, there's really something going on there. So, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I mean, the
really
footage,
strong stuff.
the footage is incredible, and for you, John, and me, that have been making films for a long time. It's very hard for me to describe the footage and the archival in the film. I mean, I just say to people, you just got to see it to believe it. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, that that they actually filmed the retaking of the prison when they were killing people, and it's all on tape. One of the things that we got was we got the tapes from New York State law enforcement, and I think that John, you'll understand this. I think that they had a porta pack. They had a porta pack, which was the first video camera, like home use video camera. And it was a camera that you held with, and it only shot black and white, and it had a cord that connected to a tape recorder, a big tape recorder on it that you could carry. And you could carry it on your side. But it was a great innovation because it was the first videotape that was out of television studios, and so that the New York State law enforcement had one, and so from the first day when the prisoners take over the prison, they're actually filming the whole thing, and they're way back, and they're filming from this tower on videotape. And they left the mic open. I don't think they knew that the mic was open. So one of the things that we did was went through every single frame of footage, because we realized that it might not be great footage, but they're talking, and they're talking about the prisoners. And at one point, it's like, oh, that's the biggest, blackest, ugliest guy I've ever seen in my life. They're saying things like that, and so we've got all that incredible footage. And because they were far back, they wanted to have a telephoto lens, so they take the sight off the rifle and put it in front of the lens. And it's the most chilling thing you've ever seen, because now the inmates are all in the crosshairs, because they're shooting through a rifle sight. It's things like that are just, unbelievable. And I think, one of the things that we just did is from the very beginning, we just said, we want to see every single thing that was shot, at Attica. And I have to say, the piece on Eyes on the Prize is great. It's incredible. And some of the people, like Pete Black, were still alive. But, we had a year and a half to look for stuff, and we're looking for stuff from the first day. We had a great archival researcher, Rosemary Rotundi, and she's looking every day for stuff and trying to find stuff and calling. And it was crazy because, again, it was during COVID. And so the archives were closed. We wanted some stuff from City College, where John Johnson has his archives, the newscaster. And they're like, oh, no, we're closed, and we don't know when we're going to open. We're just closed. And that happened, a bunch of times. But we just kept calling and looking and calling and asking and trying to ask in a nice way. And we just found some incredible things.
Were you ever tempted to use reenactments?
No, I mean, we attempted. The only time, we were kind of tempted to use reenactments in the taking of the prison, because there was not anything really, but very soon the videotape comes in, and very soon there is some archival that we can use, and that's incredible. So, at that point, we had made the decision that the film would just be better without recreations. That that we can do it without recreations, and it's just a different feeling. It's all real, and that's part of when you watch the film in the back of your head. You're like, oh my God, and anyway, you got to see it to believe it, because also the film stuff was shot on 16 millimeter, and it's shot on 16 millimeter, so it's beautiful. It really doesn't deteriorate. And we went back and had stuff retransferred at the very end from the 16mm, so that we could even get better better copies than we had used in the rough cut.
Things that was really striking to me, because we hear so much about the prison industrial complex, was sort of how you juxtaposed the town itself, Attica, with the lives of the men in the prison. And I guess, Traci, you conducted a lot of those interviews, and you must have spent a lot of time in that town meeting people, trying to explain to people what it is that you're trying to do to get their cooperation. I was just curious what that process was like, and what did you tell them?
So I actually didn't spend time in there meeting them. It was all over the phone, really, which made it that much more challenging in some ways. But
over the phone or over Zoom, or how did you do it?
Over the phone, yeah, over the phone. It was like a lot of like awkward cold calling conversations and emails, and really just taking the time to allow these people to get to ask whatever questions they wanted, to be as transparent as possible with them about my and Stanley's intentions. Obviously, the people who worked in the prison or family members are going to have, very different perspectives on what happened from the prisoners. Everybody that is involved in the story is very protective about their part of it and their corner of this narrative. I always say this very much is like the blind man with the elephant parable. Depending on where you were in the story, your experience of it varied. And so I just try to be as transparent as possible with all of them about what our intentions were for this story, that this is not a story where sort of, a voice of God, Morgan Freeman's going to come in and tell you what you just heard. It's going to be told by the people that were there. And so it really, as with the prisoners, I mean, they weren't necessarily initially jumping to kind of relive this horribly traumatic event. But a lot of it was just taking the time to continue to have those conversations, answer people's questions, and just be really honest and transparent with people about our intentions for this story, which was to just tell the truth about what happened.
And that was because of COVID that you had to do it all on the phone?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that from the very beginning, we knew that we wanted the town of Attica to be a character. That Attica is a prison that's 250 miles upstate from New York, in the middle of nowhere. It's a town that was all white, and the prison guards were all white, and we really wanted that to convey that. And the town itself to be a character. And I think that the interviews are incredible that Traci did, and the footage that the town gave us, that the people from the town gave us, the pictures of them growing up and their home movies, and you really get a sense of what the town of Attica was like, and it makes it a much fuller and rounder story. That we always felt that these were like a bunch of connected stories. There's the story of the prisoners who are in the yard and have taken control of Attica. And just so people understand, the prisoners took control, but they had 40 hostages, guards and civilian workers. So that's why they weren't attacked right away, or the prison couldn't be taken right away, because they had hostages. But they're this story of them in this yard, inside these high prison walls, and they're super high prison walls. And then outside the prison, there's another thing where law enforcement is gathering, and the families are gathering and crying and fainting, and because they don't know what's going to happen to their loved ones who are being held hostage. And then there's the town, and then there's Governor Rockefeller, who's a governor of the state, one of the richest men in the world, and governor of the state. And then it's revealed later on in the film that he's talking to Richard Nixon, the president of the United States, and Richard Nixon is telling Rockefeller what he should do and what he shouldn't do. And but still there's this group of prisoners who are in the yard and don't know what's going on really outside in any real way. And we wanted to try to tell all those stories which are like, what's the word, concentric circles that are all touching each other, but kind of not, I think that's what makes the story, that you see the story from 360 degrees.
Yeah, the clockwork that you guys built with these different clocks, there's the big clock obviously is in the yard, but then the balance between that and the town. I think this is a story a little bit like your Jonestown story, Stanley, that it could only be a film because it works, you can hear the catch in people's voices when they're talking. There's this strange visual landscape. I watched part of the film silent, by the way, which I always do. It's a really interesting way to look at a film. And 100% of the people with guns are white people. Okay. And that, you almost can keep the sound off for a lot of it. The only two people who cry in the film are two white people, right? One's an inmate and the other is the son of the hostage who died. And that also was something that I think can only happen. People don't really cry well in books, it just adds to the power of it. I was telling you guys before we started out here that after I watched it the second time, I had to go walk around the block. It was so powerful and so, we're accustomed to documentaries that are redemptive, that have a happy ending. And, the networks are very often, just forcing us to, you got to put a smiley face on the end of this. And boy, hats off to you guys for sticking to truth here. And this is a really, really, really rugged moment in American history. I had no idea how rugged it was, and I've been around a lot of rugged moments in American history. So thank you for opening that dark door for me.
In terms of those choices that, to create a work of cinema, as opposed to it being like John's a book or podcast or magazine article, how did you sort of come up with the grammar of creating this intimate experience, like the choices of whether to use recreations or whether to use narration, how to provide, how much context you wanted to give the audience in telling the story, and did you really exhaust all of the in terms of like the local news footage, the people who were, it seemed like there was a significant cast of characters of people who were covering the story and seeing it through their eyes. How much of that didn't make it into the film, and how were those choices ultimately made, and sort of what the DNA of the film was going to be?
I think that most of the things that we uncovered kind of made it into the film. I mean, there were no big things, there's a great story or a great shot or some other things that kind of didn't make it into the film. So I think, Traci, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that I'll say that I feel like to a certain degree the style followed the substance, because it certainly at the beginning we weren't quite sure how we were going to tell. Maybe there is a voiceover, maybe there are, like Stanley said, historians. I interviewed one of them, but I think what became clear once the interviews, all of the interviews, but especially with the former prisoners started coming in, is that the emotion of it and the authenticity of it and the rawness of this experience and their memories and their recounting of it was just so raw and so real and so compelling, that, like Stanley said, the historian, God bless him, he was great. He's very informed. It was a wonderful interview, but it just, when you put this pedantic language that people in the academy use next to these people, who are, again, reliving the defining trauma of their lives, it just was very clear that we just needed to kind of let those voices lead the way. And as far as the people that we approached about telling the story, I mean, it certainly was my intention to tell, like Stanley said, a 360-degree story. I think there's a version of this story that I think could be very reductive, right? Good and bad, prisoners and guards, black and white. But we were trying to do something more complicated than that, and tell a story about a system and an institution. And all of these people are swept up in that. In some ways, the guards, was there violence against the prisoners? Yes, but in some ways, they're also the blunt instrument of the state, right? And so you kind of have to talk to all of those folks. And we actually did try to get some of the guards in the film. I spoke to several of them who were hostages, and they were going to participate in the film, and then collectively, for their own reasons, they decided not to. But we certainly wanted to get every single one of those perspectives, whether it was the prisoners, whether it was the hostages, certainly the observers. The media is a huge part of that story. And so we sort of set out to build this whole universe with all of those various categories of people that experienced it. And then, the job is to just take all of that and put it together into a cohesive story.
Got it.
Yeah,
So
we were really, lucky to find not only the prisoners, but also a couple of newscasters who were inside the prison, and a bunch of people that were on the observer committee. Because, by their very fact that they've already reached a certain level in their professions, they were a little older. For the most part, they were a little older than the prisoners. But Clarence Jones, who's in the film, was almost 90. I think he was 89 when he made the film, and he just, it was incredible. Herman Schwartz, one of the lawyers, is just incredible. So that that is in some ways, it's just a real stroke of luck that we found these people and that they were still alive and healthy. But also, as Traci said, this was like this defining events in their lives. And, for so many of them, they haven't had a chance before this to really talk about it. So they're just incredible in the film. And, we talk a lot about the prisoners because they are just so amazing in the film. I mean, just their honesty and it's almost like, so they all assume characters. Here's the funny one, here's the serious one, here's the the religious Muslim one, and they're just the interviews are just beautiful.
Yeah, people have asked me, what did you say to them to get them to be like that? And I'm like, they just came that way. We really did luck up that they were so vibrant and present.
I want to go back a quick second to something that Pete asked, about some of the decisions that we made, and we talked a little bit about the fact that we made a decision not to use recreations, and then earlier we had made the decision not to use narration. That was one of the first decisions that we've got these witnesses, we can make this film without narration, and I compare it to like diving off a high diving board, and making a film is diving off a high diving board. Being a film is without a narration is like, okay, now you're going to do 3 somersaults and 2 backflips and dive into a little pool of water, so it's just makes it much more complicated. And then the other thing that we had decided to do, and it worked, was to kind of have this day by day structure. Day 1, day 2, and it's simple. Look, it's not like a stroke of genius, day 1, day 2, day 3. But we felt that every day was different, and we really wanted to have something that said, this is this part. Now this is the next day, and things change, and things change for the prisoners. Things change outside, and then the next day, and to really be clear about it, because in some ways, this film is like a roller coaster ride. In some ways, it's like a thriller. It's really, and we wanted it to have that kind of quality.
As film, as cinema making, I really respect the fact that you guys just got out of the way. I mean, I know it's not that simple. And Traci, we've all been there, and it's not You don't just show up and, I don't know what I did. You obviously did something to gain the trust of these people who I'm sure have turned down plenty of other filmmakers. But the fact that there's no fancy dancing, there's no artifice between the audience and these very real, unguarded, honestly speaking, authentic people. It just gives it a credibility that you see less and less in documentary making these days. So, well, congratulations on that.
There's two things happening in this film. There's the construction of it from a directing standpoint, the artistry, making it an experience, and then there's the producing feat. I think is quite extraordinary, and I think is something that's not totally understand in terms of how documentaries are made. That's quite remarkable. Gathering the assets, gathering the materials that will enable you to tell the story, and so that's really what's quite remarkable about this film. We've got a bunch of questions coming into the question box. I'm going to start with the first one, which, if I'm understanding it correctly, it's saying that the prisoners talk about seeing the news broadcast. Do you know how much information they were getting from your interviews with them?
They had a TV set up in the yard, and so they could watch TV, and they would watch the news. And Attica was big news. It was the largest prison rebellion in the history of the country, and there were hostages taken, so it was drama. And the prisoners said that they were going to kill the hostages if negotiations didn't take place. So there was a real drama, and so that was on the news, and they watched the news. I mean, one of the great scenes, is when Commissioner Oswald, says something, and the prisoners say, no, you said something different on TV. And no, you said something different. And like, how can you say something different? Because we're watching you on TV. And it's kind of a really, in some ways funny, but in some ways enlightening moment.
It's really amazing how the instinct that like history was happening, even the decision down to sort of the police to record, because I would imagine that's pretty unusual for the police to start filming what they're doing. That there's something beyond here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just think that that in some ways they had this porta pack, this new technology, and they were going to use it
to work
because they're filming. They're filming while the prisoners are still taken over the prison.
Yeah, but hey, look, they're proud of what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that
something shameful.
I think they thought they were collecting evidence against the prisoners instead of evidence against themselves.
Yeah,
right.
When the Nazis, when the concentration camp gates flew open, all the evidence was the Nazis' own films, of which they were proud of what they were recording, and I think there's a touch of that going on here.
Right.
I should also add, for those who haven't seen the film, I mean, one of the reasons why, besides this footage that law enforcement shot, one of the reasons why we have such great footage is on the first day, the prisoners asked the news media to come in, and they felt that in some ways, if the news media came in and filmed the whole thing, that the news media, that the footage and the news media would be witnesses to what was happening, and that it would give them a certain amount of protection if everything was seen and known. So there's incredible footage of everything from the inmates building latrines to passing out food, to negotiating, across a table with law enforcement and with the observer committee, and it's just the most amazing footage. And again, these are it was shot on 16 millimeter with the best camera people that the networks had. So it's incredible and beautiful footage, and that's one of the reasons why the film stands as it does, is because there's incredible archival that document what happened.
And that was some of the first footage, right? The porta pack material that the police were shooting was some of the first material captured as the event started unfolding. That was one of the questions.
That was the very first. Yeah, yeah. They actually shooting with the porter pack with the black and white while the prisoners are still taking the prison, and
Yeah,
then the cameras come in,
yeah,
the 16mm cameras and the
yeah.
color cameras that we use.
All right. So Traci, we have a question here. How did you track down these folks after so much time had gone by, and were you successful in getting pretty much everyone that you were trying to get?
Yeah, so we had a great head start with our fantastic consultants on the film, Heather Thompson, who really wrote the definitive, thoroughly exhaustive book about Attica, and also Judy Clark, who is a prison activist that knew some of the guys. So we had a couple. One of the things that really helped in terms of the prisoners was that, like I mentioned before, there were decades of litigation, which finally ended when the prisoners got their settlement, as you see in the sort of afterward during the credits in 2000. And the judge who oversaw the distribution of the settlement money did this really extraordinary thing. His name is Judge Michael Teleska in the Western District of New York. He allowed every single surviving prisoner, and this is 2000, so this is many years later, to either come into his courtroom or call into his courtroom and take as much time as they wanted to recount their memories and their experiences of what happened to them on the 13th. And so there is a record of that that I was able to get. It is a few hundred pages long, and I read through it and really tried to kind of get a sense of, and again, this is 2000, so 20 years later, number one, who might still be around, who seemed to be able to really articulate clearly their experiences and their emotions at that time, and then sort of figure out where they live, and then just my background is journalism. I was one of John's students when I was at the journalism school at Berkeley many moons ago. And so kind of just do that work of, public record searches, and then, have some really awkward phone calls with folks where it's like, hey, I'm a total stranger. Can you just recount the worst trauma of your life to me in great detail? And some of those calls were, people were angry and there were hangups. But fortunately, there were enough people, not only the prisoners, but also, the family members and the observers and all the folks who were gracious enough to really to share their stories with us and trust us with the stories. So we were very lucky in that regard. But I will say there was, again, we made this film in a pandemic. And it was not lost on me that pretty much everyone in the film was in an age range where they were especially susceptible to this virus. And so, I felt the pressure of what we were asking these folks to do, to please come out or allow strangers to be in a space with you to do this. There were people who, in the course of my trying to contact them, passed away. There was one guy that a week before we were supposed to interview him, he died. John Dunn, who you see in the film, who just, was so courageous as a state senator and one of the observers, he passed away during the making of the film. So all of that was very much kind of present and really lent a sense of urgency, I think.
I should add that one of the things, that is most amazing about there's so many amazing things about what Traci did, but we wanted the film to look like it was shot pre-COVID. We didn't want it to look like we're shooting off a Zoom screen, or the person had set up a camera themselves or something, and so we had to work through all of that. And in some of the interviews, Traci's sitting in the room with people and interviewing them. In some, they're looking at her image on a laptop, but we had a camera person, who in the room. So they were shot in all different ways, but they all look as a whole. And there's not one interview in the film that I feel is a compromise. The interviews just look incredible, and they're also so revealing about the people. I mean, it's in a way one of the subtext of the whole film, because the interviews are so great, is how human these people are, how human the prisoners are as humans, how human the townspeople of Attica are. It's just one of the real subtexts of the film that we don't have to talk about. But, when we screen the film, people always come up and say, oh, those guys are so great. They're so honest. They're so real. The townspeople, oh my God. It's just really one of the things that makes the film work.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I don't think I really thought about until I had some distance from the film, that, in some ways it was a steep hill to climb to ask people to sympathize with prisoners who are not, folks that we're used to kind of seeing as human beings, and hearing that humanity. And this is not a story about, wrongfully incarcerated people. These are people that did crimes and went to prison and are saying, we still do not deserve to be brutalized. We're still human beings, and we don't deserve to be harmed by the state in this way. And kind of having some distance from it, it just occurred to me that these are people who they're men. They're men of a certain age. Most of them are men of color. Most of them are ex-felons. In any one of those categories, we're just really not accustomed to seeing that level of vulnerability and humanity, and certainly not people that exist at the intersection of all those identities. And so, with some distance from the film, I think that's one of the things that I'm most proud of, is that we just sort of centered that and allowed that to really come through. And that's all, props to the guys for, showing that level of vulnerability.
And you never have to tell us that they say it. If you had to come away with one sentence from this film, I think it's Barclay. A number of people say, "I am a man," and that seems to me what this is all about. And that seems to me what got lost in all the earlier tellings of the Attica story.
I think what you said, John, is really important. Like, we do need to retell stories. Stories need to be, reimagined, or it's like, you could put an orange on it. I talk about like John McPhee, right? You could put an orange on a pedestal, and you could have 10 different people tell the story of that orange, and you're going to get 10 different stories. And there's a question here that sort of speaks to this, which is, this may have been covered already, but after all these years and how so much history is forgotten, what was the motivation for choosing this event as opposed to other events, in our history that have maybe tickled you or presented them to you as having the potential for making a great film? I don't know if that's for you, Stanley or Traci.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a number of reasons. There's one is that I thought that the story needed to be told. And when we talked to people, we had a meeting, of staff and other people. There are like 30 people there, and I asked, who doesn't know what Attica is? Like, who doesn't know anything about Attica? And 30% of the people didn't know anything. 30% didn't know like what Attica. They had no reference to it at all. Maybe another 20, 30%, know, what was it, Dog Day Afternoon, where he yells Attica, Attica, Attica. But no, there were very few people that really knew the story. And I think, there's so few people that really know the ins and outs. So that was one reason. But I think the story is so resonant, important, because it talks about so many different things. It talks about race. It talks about the prison system. It talks about power. It just talks about so many different things. So there's that level. But the other part of it is, as a filmmaker, just to be honest, again, there were witnesses to this that were alive and that could tell this powerful story, and we could get them on camera to tell this story of a life and death story, and there's that, and we knew that there was a certain amount of footage. There was some footage, because we'd seen other films or whatever, or newscasts, and we knew there was film. We had no idea that there was a film that existed, but we felt that it was a story that could really be told, and it was an important story because it talked about so many different things in this country. And again, the people are just amazing, and the footage I mean, I've done a number of historical films, and I think that Attica is the most powerful footage that I've ever worked with. It's just unbelievable.
It's interesting that a lot of the most powerful images in this film are in fact still images. I think there's a lesson there for all of us that it doesn't always have to be something that moves. In fact, the images that I'll carry to my grave are the still images.
That's so true. There's something about that singular moment, just that frame,
Yeah.
and what's happening in that frame that is so distilled and so powerful.
Yeah, I think that there's footage of the actual takeover of them, coming in with guns and shooting, and there's footage of that. But everybody, when the film is over, talks about the still pictures, the incredible, beautiful color still pictures of the prisoners stripped naked and made to stand with their hands on their head, naked, and it as John Dunn says, Senator John Dunn says, it just reminds him of depictions of slave ships and people and African-American or Africans at that point being put onto slave ships. And, it's just so interesting that those still pictures are really what stands out for so many people in the film.
Yeah, I think after, at that point in the film, after having spent the previous hour and 15 minutes or whatever it is, seeing all the shades of humanity of these guys and kind of falling in love with them a little bit and seeing the personalities and the personhood of them, it really is kind of a gut punch at the end to have to sit with those images of the bodies or the living men who are stripped naked and so dehumanized in that way, because you've gotten to know these people as people, which is really what they were kind of calling out for. So I think that's one of the reasons those images are so powerful in that moment.
And there's a special power that it's suddenly in color. We've been in a black and white world, which black and white, that's the past, that's way back there, and all of a sudden it's this livid color, blood.
And the pictures are beautiful. I mean,
they're like Renaissance Pietà.
Whoever took them was really good, because usually those kind of pictures are blurry and out of focus, or they're too far away and they're grainy. No, these pictures are incredibly.
Well, the truth is often revealed in crisis, right? Like, fiction filmmakers try to get there by putting their characters in moments of crisis where the walls that we put up, the veneer that we put up must fall away. There's a question here that sort of spoke to something we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is sort of the choices that you make, and was there material, were those choices difficult? Was there stuff that couldn't make it into the film? And there's a question here about why did you not choose to use archival interviews with some of the principals who are no longer alive, i.e. Big Black?
I think that one thing I should say is that as a filmmaker, I kind of forget what's on the cutting room floor, because if I thought about what's on the cutting room floor, I would just go insane. I'd be like, oh, every time I saw the film, I'd be like, oh God, why? So I just don't, I kind of just forget it, and but I think what was a choice that we could tell the story without cutting back to interviews that were done, years ago, or interviews that somebody else did, of Big Black in 1990 or something, that we could just keep it on one level. It's kind of hard to explain that choice, but it's like the choice of not using a couple of recreation shots. It just changes the dynamic of the film, and I thought we as we started going, we didn't need it, because the characters that we've already established, that we already established through the interviews that Traci did, talk about Big Black, and they talk about it, and you see it and you feel it. One of the greatest moments in the film, actually, we screened the film for a group that was largely African Americans, and not to give the film away too much, but when Big Black comes out at the end, and he's still alive, they broke out into standing ovation, that Big Black had actually lived, and it's really just so that goes to to say that I think we told very effectively Big Black story, and I think it would have taken in some way you out of the film, if we had Big Black, and you immediately you're saying, well, wait a minute, when did they shoot that, and wait, what happened, did he die, why, and when did he die, and all of those things that happen by using that kind of archive, but certainly it was a different way to do it, and you could do it that way.
Yeah, I think also one of the things, I mean, this just kind of happened by default, but my first instinct was certainly to find all the guys who were at that leadership table, right? Because they're the ones that are sort of articulating the ideology. They're the ones that are hands-on and working to kind of craft the demands, and have been very active as activists inside the prison before the uprising. None of those guys are alive. And so I think what ended up happening is that we have in the film all of our guys who just kind of got swept up in it, most of them, and I think what it does is it kind of gives you a sense of that unifying feeling, like that this identity that maybe they didn't come into DR with, because they're Black, they're white, they're Puerto Rican, they're Muslim, they're whatever it is, whatever political or non-political affiliation. And so what having the voices of just kind of like your average prisoner who was there does is it allows you to get this feeling of them coalescing, right, around this identity that they didn't necessarily unify around before, but because this event happened, they start to kind of recognize this political identity that they all happen. So I think I'm glad that it ended up the way that it did, because I don't necessarily know that you would have gotten that sense if it was just the leadership's voices that you were hearing.
Yeah, I completely agree, and it's also, I want to compliment you. That was a time, late '60s, when we had an acute sense that our leaders were being killed, and it's very strong in the film when toward the end you explain why you don't have the leaders. It's because they were all targeted. They were in those crosshairs that Stanley was talking about, and that's why we're not hearing from Barkley and the others.
We're running out of time, but there's a few questions left. There's two that are sort of related to each other that I want to try to dovetail. One is more of a comment, thanking you for this brilliant and powerful work, and really remarking on the members of the Observer Committee, and that how impressive they were, but in the end, none of them had authority per se. And then another comment about sort of this notion of seeing is believing, and is this in some way problematic in the sense that Attica depends as much on the images as the interviews, that this thing, we had to witness it to believe it, and that this documentation of it is an incontrovertible truth of what happened. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we have an event like January 6th that's happened where there is documentary evidence that's going to exist, that's going to be poured over, reimagined, presented, discussed, but is going to have two radically different interpretations. And so I'm thinking in the sense of that problem, I'm thinking about that Observer Committee, the notion of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the notion of what have we learned from Attica in terms of the process that they moved through to sort of work through that trauma that we could apply to some of the traumas and these things that are unfolding now in our democracy.
Traci?
I've gotten similar questions to this before, and I always feel tempted to say something positive about what we've learned, right? That we're in a better place and we took the lessons and we made adjustments, but I just look around at the evidence and that just does not feel like the case to me, which is a really bleak sort of summation of it, but I
think
just,
that's okay. I think that's okay, by the way.
I think one of the other, we've talked about many extraordinary moments in the film, but one of the things that really stands out is that conversation between Nixon and Rockefeller, right? Because when we're talking about kind of the way that race and racism works at a systemic institutional level, of those levels of power, it can be a really hard thing to get your hands around, because it's not like somebody burning a cross in your front yard, right? Like, what is institutional racism? And here we have an instance where the two most powerful, the head of New York State and the head of the American state, are literally trying to craft the narrative that justifies the police killing of 36 people, right? And that narrative is a story of unruly Blackness that needs to be contained. And in some ways, Nixon is going back to the same well that had gotten him elected with his law and order platform. It was assuring white voters that I'm going to get control of these unruly Black people. And so that is what we hear, and in their own words, Nixon and Rockefeller doing. And in terms of how that resonates with today, I look at, the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd and so many other of these moments that we believe and know have happened because we have seen them, right? But before that, the official narrative of the state was a police report, right? Like the police, like it's what I was taught in journalism school, right? Like this is the definitive factual telling of what happened. Or if you've ever been in a jury room, when the police officer shows up, that is the incontrovertible version of what happened. And so because we saw at Attica, and because we now all have one of these in our hands and we see today, we know that that state version is a version, but it's not the version. And that's all because we see it with our own eyes now.
I'm going to go out on a limb here to sort of close this out. And I know John's going to have a brilliant final comment, but I find the juxtapositions are as important as sitting stories next to each other are just as important as the stories themselves. And when we see sort of what happened at Attica, and when we imagine what might have happened at the Capitol had it been Black Lives Matter storming the Capitol, I think we have profound insights and perspective that can be instructive, regardless of sort of how we believe and how we feel about the state of our democracy. That films like this are vitally important, and I just want to congratulate both of you for making this film at a moment, even if there is some relevance. There's no accidents. I think the fact that COVID came along and slowed you guys down, and things that we're struggling with, the things that we're struggling today, these stories are vitally important for us to get a deeper understanding on sort of where we've been, where we are, and where we're headed. So thank you.
Yeah. It's an extraordinary job, guys. It's an extraordinary piece of history that you've made.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My great-grandchildren, thank you.
Well, I want to thank both of you. Thank our hosts. Thank everyone who submitted questions. And you can in the chat there is a link for the film where you can watch it on YouTube up until, when is it, Stanley? February?
Yeah, at least through February.
Through February.
Yeah, so it'll be up for a while.
All right, great. Well,
we really thank Showtime for doing that, for making it available easily to everybody.
Yeah.
Before we were telling people, well, if you don't have Showtime, you can do the free trial for a week and then cancel. So now you can get it very easily on YouTube. So thank you Showtime for doing that, and thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, all of you, for coming together today and talking about this brilliant film. I hope everyone on here has watched it, and if you haven't, please do watch it and share it with all of your friends and networks, because we really need everyone to see this film and learn this important part of history, because I do think it's very relevant to what's happening today as well. So thank you, Showtime, for bringing this program to MOAD, and thank you all for sharing part of your Martin Luther King Jr. holiday with us. Though all of our programs have been virtual today, MOAD is open to the public Wednesday through Sundays, and we currently have 5 beautiful exhibitions on view through February 27th. So I encourage you to come to San Francisco if you're local, or if you're planning to travel to the Bay Area, come check us out. You can also check out moadsf.org for all of our programming, virtual and in person. Please follow the link that I put in the chat to share your thoughts about today's program on our virtual program survey. And if you're able to donate to support the work of the museum, of course, any amount is welcome and appreciated. Again, thank you for spending part of your day with us, especially the four of you. I know you're all busy, and it's just wonderful to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Moad.
So much.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, John.
Happy MLK Day.
Guys.